All right, Haley, I'm going to try to go through some of the questions on these pages and I'm going to be writing on my own line paper, but hopefully I'll be able to give you enough sort of suggestion and context for the questions that you'll be able to do a little more on your own. So the first couple pages you sent me that are filled in, they look good. You seem to have the concepts down. Nicely done. This looks good. Okay, so it's here, I guess, that things start to go a little bit awry. So for the warm-up, it's pretty straightforward stuff. So I'm just gonna switch over. So the first question, I think I can just explain without writing anything. When you're comparing two lines and you want to identify which has the greater rate of change, you're just looking for the steeper line. So between these two, obviously this is more steeper. It's like a hill that would be harder to walk up. So that is the steeper line. Okay, and then you can apply that same logic over here. Even though they're sloping in the other direction, it's still the steeper line that has the greater rate of change. Then when we have an equation, the steepness or the slope of the line comes from the number in front of x. Okay, so the 0.5 here and the 3 here, those are what give a line its steepness. Okay, and it's the bigger number that makes the line steeper. So comparing 0.5 and 3, obviously 3 is a bigger number, so that would have the greater rate of change. It would be the steeper line. Okay, and when those numbers are negative, it's still the same idea. It's the size of the number that impacts steepness. So here I've got negative, and then because there's no number written in there, it's kind of implied it's a 1. Here I've got -6. Okay, so the bigger number, 6, gives us the greater rate of change. These ones, find each difference. This was just a little bit of practicing doing subtraction with integers. So -10 minus 3. You're already at -10. You go down 3 more. It's going to take you to -13. So this was just a chance to practice doing some math with integers, which I'm sure you have encountered before. I'll switch over to my line paper and I'll show you just one on the page. So there was one there, part B, said -14 minus -6. So just remembering that when we're working with integers like this, when I subtract a negative number, it's the same as adding. So this actually ends up being -8. Okay? But that's the only place things would get tricky. Find the difference just means subtract. And then here, simplify. I'll do one of these on my paper. I'm just going to write it down before I flip over. So that's 5 minus 2 over -3 minus 6. Okay, and the reason that I'm getting you to do practice questions like this is just because this is the slope formula. You wrote it on the previous page that you sent me. Y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1, right? So this is just practicing when we sub numbers into that formula. Okay, so 5 minus 2 is 3, and -3 minus 6 is -9. Okay, and then I could simplify that. I don't care that much if you do, but I could simplify that. 3 over 9 is the same as -1 over 3. Okay, or if you put it in your calculator, you would get like -0.33 repeating. Okay. What's next here? Last night, David worked 5 hours and made $32.50. What is the rate of change? So when you're asked to find a rate of change, you're always being asked to divide. So in this case, we want to know the hourly rate of David's earnings. So we would take the amount of money he made and we would divide it by the amount of time, and we would get his hourly rate. Okay, so it looks to me like he's going to make $6.50 an hour. Okay, you can try checking my math on the calculator. Okay, but the answer to that would be $6.50 per hour. That's his rate of earning. The graph here shows the total cost for a large pizza with different numbers of toppings. X represents there's a typo there. The number of toppings, and Y represents the total cost in dollars. Determine the coordinates of the two marked points. Okay, so the coordinates, this isn't a very well labeled graph, but our axis right here is always the x-axis, the horizontal axis, and then our axis here, always the y-axis, the vertical axis, okay? And then the 2 points marked, you can see there's kind of a circle here. That's our first point. And the way I would write the coordinates for that, I've got 0 on the x, okay, because this is 5, so 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. And then I've got 10 on the y. It looks kind of like -10, but I think that's just because of the grid line. It's actually just 10. Okay, so if I were to write those coordinates down, it would look like this. 0 for the x, 10 for the y. Okay, so when I'm writing coordinates, when you're asked to do that, this is what your answer should look like, where you have the x coordinate listed first and then the y coordinate listed second. Okay. And then determine the slope of the line from 5. What does it mean? Okay, so let's go through that. So I already wrote down that the first point was 0, 10. The second point here, so this is 2 on the x. And then if I read here, it looks like 14 on the y. Okay, so I'm going to flip back here. So I've got 2 on the x and 14 on the y. And then just like on the previous page, your slope formula is y, I call it y2, but it looks like you called it y end or y finish. That is a totally reasonable way of doing it. Y start, and then x end minus x start. Okay, y2 minus y1, x2 minus x1, however you want to label them, as long as you've got 2 different y's and 2 different x's. So here, I would say the y at the end is 14, and the y at the start was 10, and then I've got the x at the end was 2, and the x at the beginning was 0. So 14 minus 10, that's 4, and 2 minus 0 is 2. So when I simplify that, I get 2. Now, if I go back and read the question, so that's the answer, that's the slope, but it did ask me to sort of put that in context a little bit. So the graph shows the total cost for a large pizza with different numbers of toppings, where x is the number of toppings and y is the total cost. Okay, so if I look at this graph here, the way I can interpret it is that when I have 0 toppings, the pizza costs $10. So presumably like a pizza with just sauce and cheese would be $10. And then for every one topping I add, the price goes up by $2. Okay, so my slope means each topping costs $2. Okay, so it's like the rate of change of cost of the pizza. Okay, here. Okay, so this question, hopefully, I'm just going to do one of them. And then I'm going to hope that one example is enough to help you do the other ones. I'm going to skip over the first one just because it's the simplest of them. I'll do the middle one. And then you can try the other ones. Okay, so let me just write down the equation. Y equals 4x minus 5. Okay, and then I'll flip over to my writing screen. So that's this right here. Y equals 4x minus 5. So it asked me, it gave me these x values, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, I believe. Let me just double check that that's right. Yep. And it asked me to figure out y. Okay, so I'll show you how to calculate the first one, and then maybe for the rest of them you'll be able to do them in your head. But the idea here is you take the equation, but you swap out the x value for whatever number is given here. Okay, so 4 times 0 is 0, minus 5 is negative 5. Okay, and this one 4 times 1, so I've swapped out my x for a 1 here, minus 5. So that's 4 times 1 is 4, minus 5 is negative 1. 4 times 2 minus 5 equals 4 times 2 is going to be 8, minus 5 is 3. 4 times 3 minus 5. So 4 times 3 is going to be 12, minus 5 is 7. Okay, you might even start to see a pattern forming here that I just keep going up by 4 each time. And you can, if you start to see a pattern like that, you can totally just use it to fill in the values. So I went up by 4, I went up by 4, I went up by 4. If I go up by 4 again, I'm going to get to 11. Okay? And then it asks you to graph. So 1, 2. My graph is obviously going to be a bit messy because I'm doing it kind of freehand here. Okay. Now, usually we can use a scale where every grid square equals 1. But here, I can see that I need to go up to kind of a high number. So I'm going to pick a scale instead where every grid square is worth 2. So this is going to be 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. And then if I go below, negative 2, negative 4, negative 6, negative 8, negative 10. So this is my y-axis here, and it's that label is not on the graph you're given. You might want to add it in. It's very helpful, whereas this is my x-axis. Now my x values, I can just use a scale of 1 here. That totally works because I think I have five spots. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then negative 1, negative 2, negative 3, negative 4, negative 5. Okay, and if I'm going to flip back to the page for a second. So you obviously don't need to, you can just fill in, the grid squares are given to you and you can just fill in the numbers, okay? But it will end up looking pretty similar to mine. Okay, and then we're actually going to plot our points. So when x is 0, which is right here, 0, y is negative 5, so that would be right here. And when x is 1, y is negative 1, so that would be right, it's like right over top of the number I wrote. Okay, so that's negative 1 on the y and 1 on the x. When x is 2, y is 3, so that's halfway between 2 and 4 right there. When x is 3, y is 7, so it's halfway between 8 and 6. And then when x is 4, y is 11, just a little bit above my 10 line there. Okay, and then you can, if you have a ruler or some sort of straight edge, you can connect your points. I find when I don't have a ruler, if I draw a dotted line, it looks a little bit straighter. Okay, so that's a graph. And then it asked me to pull out the slope and the y-intercept. So we'll start with the y-intercept. That one's kind of easier, I think, to find from a graph. If I look at this line, so this right here is the y-axis, and the line crosses the y-axis right there, okay, at negative 5. So my y-intercept is negative 5. The slope, a couple different ways we can think about that. One is to think, okay, I'm going, every time I go over 1, I go up 4. So I can say, oh, the slope is 4, because every time I go over 1, I go up 4. Another way of finding the slope is just by looking back at the equation. Oh, you can't see what I just wrote. There we go. Y-intercept, negative 5, right there. Slope, if I go over 1, I go up 4. So that gives me the slope. I could also look right here. Okay, in the equation, the number in front of x is also one way of finding the slope. So 4 there, 4 there. Okay, hopefully I can be a little less long-winded on the future ones so you don't have 45 minutes of videos to watch. But that was